and welcome back to Bookish Theories. In today's video, we'd like to talk about NewJeans DITTO, focusing on a little breakdown and analysis of the lyrics, side A and side B, to see what they can tell us about the story told in the videos. Ditto is a song written by Minji herself that expresses the emotions of a person who wishes for their loved one to reciprocate their feelings. In this pre-release, NewJeans reinterpret the Baltimore club dance style in a fresh yet nostalgic track. Like in their previous songs, the Y2K aesthetic that characterizes their videos is put to good use with a brand new story associated to this release. As we see in a second, the narrative is divided into two separate music videos, which are respectively called Side A and Side B. While NewJeans are obviously front and center in the events that take place in the story, the real protagonist this time is a girl named Isu. In both videos, she's played by actress Park Ji-woo, which you might actually recognize from All of Us Are Dead, Little Women, and other projects. In the story, Park Ji-woo's character Hisu is a young student with an apparent passion for filmmaking. While at first the narrative seems to focus on a friendship with the 5 members of NewJeans, soon enough we discovered that this is not really the case, because the story that we are being presented here is more about loneliness than anything else. You see, in many respects, the narrative chosen for this song will be able to resonate with many people. It's all about growing up, finding a way to cope with the struggles that come with it, and eventually realizing that the comforting fantasy that you choose to escape in might actually be the very thing holding you back. Full of eerie details, nostalgic touches, and symbolic imagery, Ditto tells us a story of growth that is somehow both heartwarming and heart-wrenching. So without further ado, let's start from side A and see what's going on. Now at the beginning, the video opens with a woman entering a room. The lady in question is none other than Hisu herself, whom we meet as a young adult in the process of remembering her past in school. As she opens a box, inside we see some dusty VHSs as well as some wooden bunnies. Right off the bat, these are a dead giveaway of who Hisu is supposed to represent, because bunnies are not only the representative animal of the group itself, but also the official name of NewJeans' fandom. To a certain extent, we can say that Hisu is like an embodiment of young fans relying on NewJeans for comfort, and even if at the beginning the video opens by showing us the girl as an adult reminiscing about the time that she spent with them, the very fact that she kept all of that stuff already goes to show how meaningful that connection was. After blowing the dust off the VHS, Hisu pops the tape in the VCR and off we go down memory lane. As I mentioned before, the video initially tells us a story that ends up being very different from the reality that young Hisu lives in, but to be honest, this is important in and of itself. You see, what the tape is showing us at the beginning is Hisu's perspective on the meta, or rather the fantasy that she created in order to escape a difficult reality. In this fantasy, the 5 members of NewJeans are his schoolmates, and all 6 of them are part of a group of friends that always hangs out together. While Hisu is not part of the dance team, she's basically the videographer of the group, and she's in charge of recording the girls not only as they practice, but also as they live their everyday life. She records them while they dance in the gym, on the roof, in the yard, and in the classroom. She's with them when they mess around in school and when they have fun together in their spare time. And even if Hisu herself is never included in the recording, NewJeans are generally nice to her and they sincerely treat her like a friend. Now these dynamics are actually very interesting here, because to a certain extent this can be seen as a representation of the relationship between fan and idol. In the video, for instance, we see that Hisu is included in the friend group but she's not part of the dance team, and the same can be said for fans who are part of the community but not part of the groups themselves. While in some parts of the video Hisu and the girls interact face to face, moreover, the majority of their interactions actually takes place through the lenses of the camera, with her being on the side of the audience and NewJeans being on the side of the idol. On top of that, the relationship is mostly based on their shared passion for performing arts, and like a fan with an idol, every time that the girls dance, Hisu loves it because their dance is a genuine source of happiness. When she is with them, Hisu always smiles. She doesn't feel left out, but rather she feels included and a part of something bigger. She feels loved, accepted, understood even, and this is very similar to the bond that fans might create with their idols. While there is often a camera separating them, the comfort and happiness the fans feel when consuming the content is very real, so much so that this bond can help people overcome the pain and struggles of their everyday life. In certain cases, however, this positive and temporary escape can develop into something different, because when this connection becomes the most important one in your life, it's very easy to get lost in a delusion that is not real. At that point, the healthy distraction that makes us happy can become the very thing that makes us spiral, and as it turns out, this is exactly what happens to Isu in the story. story. As we see in both videos, the girl is having a hard time in school. Inside B we see her crying, and throughout the story we can also notice that she's wearing a cast because she broke her arm. While the narrative doesn't explain what happened, her injury might be an indication that she might be a victim of school violence, and if this is the case, then the escape provided by NewJeans would also be a way for her to feel less lonely, scared and isolated. Since in the video we never see her interacting with anybody but them, it's likely that Hisu doesn't have any friends, so instead of venturing out into the world to find some, she essentially ventures in her imagination to create a scenario where NewJeans become her BFFs. If in reality the cast remains white because there's nobody there to sign it, in her fantasy the girls decorated like friends do. Then they go on bike rides together, they play with makeup, they have fun, and Hisu is happy because when she's lost in this fantasy everything is great. The truth of the matter, however, is that everything is not great because this fantasy isn't real and it's only leading her further away from reality. If you look closely, we as the audience never fully see Hisu's face, and this is because most of the times she's hiding behind the camera. The very device that helps her connect with her fantasy friends is also something that acts as a wall that protects her from the outside world. The camera keeps her from getting seen and getting appreciated by real people, so it's like a vicious cycle, if you will, because the distraction that makes her happy is the very thing keeping her from finding happiness in real life. In the video, we see that the only person who is seemingly able to crack this wall and break the illusion is a boy played by actor Choi Hyun-wook. In the story, he plays the role of a fellow student who seems concerned about Hisu's declining mental health, and throughout the narrative we get the sense that the two of them might actually have feelings for one another. This plot point actually brings us right back to the theme of the song itself, because Ditto is all about a person who has strong feelings for somebody and wishes for them to feel the same way. In the story, Hisu and the boy seem mutually interested in one another, so much so that even if at the beginning she's completely focused on the girls performing, he still manages to get her attention by breaking through her little world. When his face first appears in the recording, we see that Hisu gets very flustered and immediately moves the camera away to focus back on the girls. Now this is much more significant than what it seems, because as we see later in the video, when Hisu uses the camera she's lost in her little world and doesn't really register the real people around her. When she's in the class, for instance, everybody's looking at her, but Hisu doesn't really see it because she's so deep into her hallucination, the real people are nothing more than background characters. In the gym, however, the boy's face manages to break through. He pops into focus despite being in the background, and this is a major breakthrough that will help her moving forward. While throughout side A we see that Hisu is very much absorbed by the fantasy that she built. Whenever she puts down the camera, the boy is there, and even if at first she looks away, his presence slowly draws her back to reality little by little. Inside A, however, we see that for the moment the fantasy wins, which is also evident by the scene of the rain. When Hisu is getting out of school, the girls are with her, and even if she has an umbrella, she chooses not to use it so that she will not be the only one to stay dry. This is a dead giveaway that at this point she's still lost in her delusion, because as we see at the end, the girls are not really there, but she chooses to endure the storm anyway. Hisu refusing to use the umbrella in the storm is also very symbolic here. It metaphorically means that even if she has the tools to overcome the difficulties in her life, she still chooses not to use them to follow a fantasy that yes is comforting but doesn't really help her getting out of the storm. This is because the fantasy gives her a feeling of belonging that she doesn't really have in real life. Like in the song, Hisu just wants to be liked. She wants to love and care for people and wants these people to love and care for her in return. Like we see with the boy, in reality achieving this task is much more complicated. It can be intimidating and even scary to put yourself out there, because even if you want people to like you back, there is always the chance that they could reject you. In her fantasy instead, NewJeans are always there for her. They never leave her in doubt, because Hisu likes them and they like her back. As comforting as it is, however, Hisu needs to let go of that fantasy if she wants to live a real life in the real world, and by the end of side A, we see that the illusion is finally starting to break. After a long day spent with her imaginary friends, and after painting Minji's nail with her pink polish, Hisu happily falls asleep with the girls. While sleeping, she has a dream where she's standing on the edge of a snowfield, and in the distance she spots a door that looks at her straight in the eye. Once again, this is a very symbolic scene here. In this case, the doll almost feels like an extension of Isu herself. It's like her spirit animal, if you will, her guide, which appears in a frozen field in order to lead her towards the next step of her journey. On a metaphorical level, both the doll and the snow are symbols of innocence and purity, but having a snow dream often marks the beginning of a spiritual awakening. In turn, the doll is also an animal associated to many different qualities, among which there is also intuition and self-awareness. Isu dreaming of a doll in the snow implies that it's time for her to experience an awakening. She has to wake up, not only from the dream itself, but also from the fantasy that she created, and sure enough, this is exactly what happens next. As she wakes from her dream, Isu is alone, and not because the girls left, but because they were never there to begin with. The cast they drew on that very afternoon is clean, and the nail that Isu painted thinking it was Minji's was hers all along. At this point, the video finally reveals the heartbreaking reality that Isu is a very lonely girl, and the happy memories that she shared with the girls were only real to her. This leads us right into side B, which not only gives us a new perspective on the entire situation, but also portrays the next step in Isu's journey. Now that the truth has been revealed, the video begins with a side-by-side comparison between reality and fantasy. The difference between side A and side B, however, is the point of view that we are being offered. If in side A we kind of saw the truth from the perspective of the people around her, now we're finally looking at Isu's perspective where she realizes the truth. Now that the illusion is falling apart, the recording begins to glitch, so the videos of the girls suddenly disappear to show the reality that she was actually recording all along. Now Isu finally sees the empty halls, the students looking at her in disbelief, and at this point she doesn't smile anymore because reality is finally catching up to her. In the next scene, Isu is crying, and even if the girls are by her side trying to comfort her, this time she's not really acknowledging them. The person she acknowledges instead is the boy, who in turn looks very concerned for her well-being. Overwhelmed by her two worlds colliding, Isu momentarily decides to run away from both. She stands up and runs away, leaving behind both the girls representing fantasy and the boy representing reality. Now at this point, the NewJeans are very concerned too, because even if they're basically an extension of Isu herself, they're sentient enough to be worried about what's going on. In this context, they're almost like her spirits, not in the sense that they're dead, but rather in the sense that they're a manifestation of her wishes and emotions. They're happy when she's happy, and they're sad when she's sad. They basically say ditto, because in a sense, that version of them exists because she created them. Now I say a version of them because I actually think that in the next scene we get to see the real NewJeans, that is, the real life girls in the story that Isu used as an inspiration to create their imaginary friends. While she's walking alone in the evening, Isu comes across the 5 girls dancing in an empty parking lot. As she watches them dance, this moment overlaps with the fantasy that Isu invented, but when we get to the scene where the girls drew on the cast, we see that in reality this never took place. In the reality of the story, the girls really exist, it's just that Isu is not really close with them, so she kinda created a version of them that is always by her side no matter what. To a certain extent, this also fits with the comparison that I drew with the relationship between fan and idol. Real life NewJeans really exist somewhere in the world, and so do the rest of the idols in the industry. Even if fans don't know them personally, they can connect with them through the camera, and in certain cases, if they really want to meet them, even by creating a version of them with their imagination. In a similar way, Isu made up her own NewJeans when she needed them the most, but in her case, the illusion took over her life completely, so now it's time to do something about it. As I mentioned before, Isu is finally awakening, and the final step before coming back to reality is to rip the band-aid off and sever the connection once and for all. As we see in the video, the girl goes back to the roof, and this time she takes the camera and drops it. When it crashes on the pavement, the fantasy is destroyed, and in a scene that is both beautiful and haunting, the girls that she imagined eventually disappear. As they lift their arms in the air, their bodies start to blend in with their surroundings, and in a final embrace, the 5 spirits become absorbed by the world and become one with nature. After fulfilling their role, Isu doesn't need them anymore. She's ready to let them go, and this is evident by the second scene of The Rain, where this time Hisu opens the umbrella and ventures under the rain on her own. Instead of hiding in a fantasy, Hisu chooses to face the storm and overcome it with the tools that she has, and even if it's not easy, she's not looking back. In the next scene, for instance, we see that in the evening, Hisu receives a phone call from Minji, and this is actually a very interesting scene. You would think that since Minji is calling her, it was all real, until you actually remember that NewJeans communicate with fans with an app called phoning that is literally structured like a phone. Whenever the girls go live, for instance, the service is designed like a video call, so if we apply the same concept to the scene, Minji's call can be seen as a metaphor for the times these idols connect with fans via apps and social media. In the last few years, it has become very common to receive notifications if idols use certain apps, and like we see in the videos, this can feed on the illusion that they are your friends even when they are not. As we see in the video, Hisu is very sad to ignore the call from Minji, but despite of that, she stays consistent and doesn't reply. This is because in that moment of her life, she needs a clean cut. She can no longer indulge in that fantasy because that is the only way that she can fully come back to reality. By the end of the story, Hisu succeeds. We see her walking home with the boy, and after the dog confronts her one last time, the animal eventually walks away because her awakening is finally complete. At this point, the end of Side B brings us right back to the beginning of Side A. Hisu is now grown, and she's back to reopen a box full of memories that she left behind. When she plays the tape, the video shows us that this time the recording includes the 5 members of NewJeans, and even if this final scene seems to contradict everything that I just said, in reality this is not really the case. As I mentioned before, the point is not that the girls weren't real, but rather that the fantasy wasn't. In a similar way, idols exist in the content that you watch, but don't really exist in whatever scenario you might make up in your mind. In the story, Hisu lost sight of this distinction, so she had to sever the connection in a very drastic way. This, however, doesn't really erase the genuine feelings that she felt for the girls, so now that she's a bit older and mature, she can go back and reconnect with those videos that made her so happy in the past. Even if she had to let go, the girls will always be there for her, and sure enough, in the final scene, Hisu indulges in a little fantasy and reunites with the friends that she loved so much. The message of this beautiful story seems to be that even if these types of parasocial relationship might not be real, the comfort and happiness that they provide very much is, and can actually last for a very long time. Despite of that, however, people have to be careful not to lose sight of reality, because especially in moments of struggle, the fantasy that gives you joy can also make you lose yourself in your own mind, which quite obviously defeats the original purpose. All in all, your idols will always be there to sing, dance and cheer you up, so don't forget to live well and enjoy life. In the meantime, however, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please think about liking and subscribing. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.